Good afternoon. Hello, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are based. And actually, by the way, feel free to write down where you're based. It's always very interesting for us to know where our teachers are set. My name is Silvia. I think you already know myself. I'm the marketing manager here at ELi Publishing. And beside me, next to me, you can see our dear guest, our speaker, Rob Howard. I will be pleased to introduce him in a few seconds. I will be very quick, I promise, but I always like to give you a few technical details regarding this platform, the use of the platform, and this live event, especially for the new attendees. So first thing, feel free to write down any comments, questions you might have. So under the toolbar, you will see the chat box or question box. Feel free to open it and write down. One thing to bear in mind is that you won't be able to see the other participants, I'm afraid, but I will be monitoring the chat box, the question box. So I will be getting back to you, answering you, or reading aloud for Rob, for our speaker, if you need to actually ask him direct questions. So feel free. Then remember to download the handout. Our speaker today has kindly put together a handout for you to download for your archive, for your study. Just remember to download it before the end of the session, otherwise it won't be possible after I close this live workshop. So again, if you go in your toolbox, in your toolbar, you will be able to see the documents writing. Okay, it's a banner with the documents. Open it and download the PDF file. Then by tomorrow evening, you will be receiving the certificate of attendance. It will be sent in a PDF format, and please just make sure to check the spam as well, because it sometimes, go to webinars, emails sometimes go into the spam folder, I'm afraid. And then recorded video. Yes, there will be a recorded video of this session, and it will be then launched and shared with all the participants and all other teachers, or with your friends and colleagues who couldn't make it for today, through our Facebook channel. So make sure to follow us at ELi Publishing on Facebook, okay? And then the session of today consists of about 45 minutes of workshop and presentation by Rob Howard, and then it will follow 10-15 minutes of questions and answers. My personal suggestion to you is don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions you might have, any curiosity. See the moment we got here our presenter, and take this huge opportunity. So I'm happy now to give the floor to Rob Howard. I actually would like to say just a few things about him, but he has such a long, let's say, biodata. He does so many things at the same time. I'm very impressed. And I can start by saying that he is owner of the Online Language Center and of the Business Language Training Institute. He's also EFL Talks founder, and he's also a teacher, he's also a trainer, he's also a coach, he's also a writer, especially focused on business English. And last but not least, is actually IATEFL Poland president. Actually, Rob is based in Poland. So, of course, important to let you know, especially for teachers who are based, so following us today, who are based in Poland, also nearby. So I'm happy now to give the floor to Rob with a journey into multimodal ELT instruction. Thanks, Rob, for being here, and over to you now.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And hello, buongiorno. That's all I remember in Italian.
Yeah, no worries. All teachers are actually attending from elsewhere, abroad. I mean, from outside of Italy. All over the world.
Good. Well, I really hope you can understand me okay. My English isn't very good. American. Sorry, bad joke. But let's talk today about multimodal instruction. And just a few things that I want to say. You know, you've probably heard the big argument about learning styles, multi-intelligences. Back in 1983 in Boston, where I'm from, Howard Gardner came out with his theory about multi-intelligences. And unfortunately, English teachers especially jumped on this and said, well, there's definite differences in intelligences. And even Howard Gardner came out and said, no, you're misunderstanding and misquoting what I came up with. So there's a difference between multi-intelligence. These are abilities. What we're going to talk about is learning styles, which is, it's a more comfortable approach. And I don't even like the word styles. I prefer learning preferences. And, you know, some of you may have your own preferences, may have realized throughout your life when you're learning that you learn certain things easily by maybe writing them down, maybe listening to them, maybe you need to see them. And these are the preferences that we're going to talk about. And just to give you, excuse me, a little history, this is basically my learning journey of languages right here. And I'm going to tell you a little story about each one of them, but very short. Now, I have studied all these, well, I've worked on all these languages, but the preferences in the way that I learned, they all changed. And I realize more and more as I'm becoming a language learner once again, it depends on the situation, the objective, and the need. It'll come down to what your preference actually may be. Now, we'll go through each one. I'll give you a little background. Now, of course, being from the United States, I grew up with English. Started off listening and then speaking, then reading, and then writing. So learning English for me, I used all four sources. Now, I studied Hebrew, and with Hebrew, it was done through listening, through speaking, and through reading, very little writing, and most of the time being beaten by my Hebrew teacher. Now, my family is from actually Eastern Europe originally, and sitting around the table with my aunts and all the cousins, I was able to pick up a lot of Yiddish when I was a kid, something I don't use anymore. When I was in high school, I studied Latin for 4 years. The majority of it was done with Ovid here, mostly through reading and writing, as Latin isn't a very popular spoken language anymore. I think it might be dying off. And then I studied ancient Greek with Homer. Oh, wrong Homer. Let me get the right Homer here. And this was strictly done through reading. Didn't do any writing, strictly learned the language through reading. Also, because we're required to learn foreign languages in the States, I studied many years of French. And I'm old. These are the old language labs we used to have, where we sat in little cubbies and listened to recordings. Most of what we did for learning French was through listening and repeating what we heard in the recording. Very little reading, very little writing. Then, as I went to university, I got into philosophy, and I was very curious to read Jean-Paul Sartre. And people told me, really you should read it in French. So I improved my French strictly through reading. And I really don't speak French at all, but I can watch a French movie and I can read text and understand still. Then moving on, while in university, I lived in a predominantly Italian neighborhood, and I learned a lot of Italian because I'm not anymore, but I used to be a skinny little kid, and all the Italian mothers used to invite me to their house and feed me to fatten me up. So I learned Italian through listening and through speaking. Then I had a thing for Japanese girls, so I decided to learn Japanese. And this I learned through reading and speaking. And this is the book I was using, and it worked pretty well. But then I moved to Brazil back in 2002, and I lived and taught in Brazil for years. I never studied Portuguese, but I learned it pretty well. I would say I'm a high B2, low C1. But I learned it all through listening and speaking, and basically honed it talking with taxi drivers because they love to talk. And now, for the past 7 years, I'm in Poland, and this is my method. Pray, pray, pray some more. It's not an easy language for me. And when I realized this, I realized that I had to change my style of learning in order to learn Polish. And I'm doing that now. So you can see I've got a very complicated journey, and who knows where my journey will take me next, but it'll probably mean studying with AI. I'll probably need a robot. So let's talk a little bit about multimodality, and it's the different modes that we use. It's working with images, writing, spoken language, motion, and we'll talk a little bit more. But it's the application of multiple literacies within a single medium. Now, there's basically, for multimodality in general, there's 5 modes: the visual, the oral, gestural, spatial, linguistic, and each one, we're talking visual, hearing, talking with our hands and gesturing, kinesthetic, using movement, and now using technology and using course books for the linguistic side. But what multimodality, the importance of it is it enhances engagement, and learners are diverse. And I'll give you a quote. I'm going to repeat this later. This is something that I wrote a while ago. There's no one way to learn. Learners need diversity. So there is no one way, or if you want to say right way, to teach, because everybody is an individual. They learn differently, they comprehend differently, they understand differently, and content means something different to everyone. So let's talk about the visual mode. The visual mode, you're looking obviously with reading, and we're looking at reading texts, mostly reading different things, whether it be memes, whether it be comic books, whether it be your course book. And this is the visual mode. Now, we learn a lot. I do different talks on the different methodologies. And what I found is we actually learn more by seeing 50% more than by listening. And we tend to process much faster by seeing things than by listening. But this is a generalization, and it depends. I just realized how much I'm gesturing. Just don't let me do the Donald Trump. So, visual mode, this is using infographics, using a lot of diagrams. And this really helps with comprehension because it gives people a chance to look at it and take it in. And this is one of the biggest problems that we have today because everything is so fast and so quick. We don't have time to really take it in and comprehend, put it into long-term memory, which is our retention. And this is important for retention. And we find there's a lot of research that's been done that shows visual learning adds to higher levels of retention. So keep that in mind. We always should have and back up everything we do with visuals. Now, the auditory mode, this is speaking, and we normally do our pair work, our group work, sometimes one-to-one, and we use many different methodologies that we can do with this. And we'll talk a little bit about that more. But auditory is very important for other reasons, because you can be a learner and you can read beautifully, like I do in French. I can watch a movie and understand most of it. Usually it's a lack of vocabulary, but I can't speak it. And auditory is so important because auditory is where you build up comfort and where you build up confidence. You know, when was the last time you heard somebody say, I'm a very confident reader? We don't talk about that. We talk about confidence when we're talking about speaking, making presentations. So, of course, very important. And it's important when we're using it. And what you'll see with some of the examples I give, you need to concentrate on authentic language. And this is really important because the content and the context has to be realistic in real life. We call it realia. Dealing with things that people will actually be talking about. Now, I deal a lot with business English. It's one of the specialties that I teach. And I work with business language and I work with business situations. I don't work with the general English like I went shopping with Aunt Sally because it has no meaning for the learner. So it needs to be authentic and it needs to be authentic to their needs. Now, the best thing is here with auditory, we spend a lot of time working on listening skills and we spend time working on pronunciation. When I moved to Poland, I noticed with a lot of people here that they studied in school, they could read a newspaper, they could read papers for academic papers, but they didn't have a lot of opportunity to converse with people. And I find that they come across words when they're talking, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the word. And it turns out that they're fluent at the use of reading and writing words, but they've never heard it and they've never spoken it. So auditory is important to give us this opportunity. dealing with recordings, working with podcasts, working with songs, YouTube videos. This is very important so they can hear as well as visualize and put these together. Course books always have usually a little CD or a little recording, and headphones. They need to click on these and listen because it's so important that they repeat and drill on these. Now, kinesthetic, I teach online. It's a little more difficult online to move around, but in the classroom, kinesthetic really becomes important. And I remember when I first started teaching years ago back in Brazil, I heard Herbert Gupta, and he did a talk talking about kinesthetic learning. He gave us a poem, and he recited a poem, and he asked us to repeat it. And everybody would get the first line, the second line, then people would start dropping out. Nobody made it to the end of the poem. Then he redid the poem, and he made body movements that corresponded with the poem that he was reading, like digging a hole, throwing a ball, eating. And we all copied these motions. And then he said, read the poem back again. And I was surprised 50% of the audience got to the end. Most of the audience got almost to the end. So taking advantage of kinesthetic learning, working movement into the learning is really important. Now, it's not the only way that you can do it. I love role plays. Role playing, really important because you're putting yourself into that situation and you're concentrating based on that. Now, when I first moved to Brazil, I lived in the Northeast, excuse me, and I lived in a little beach town. All they had in this beach town were restaurants, stores, and hotels. That was it. Now, the people that lived there, the natives that grew up there, most of them very poorly educated. Most of them could not read and write in Portuguese. Yet the hotels, the restaurants sent me their students. I had 140 of them to teach them basic survival English because they were expecting an influx of foreigners, which they received and they still do to today. So I started working with waiters, people that worked at registration desks at hotels, bellboys, cleaning people, and sales clerks. And I was trying to figure, how am I going to make this meaningful? Because they can't read, they can't take notes. So I started with the waiters, and I went out and I got paper plates, plastic forks, knives, spoons, cups, napkins, everything you could imagine, and everything they needed. And we worked basically learning vocabulary by using the prop, let's say bottle of water, cup of coffee. So we learned it through role playing and having hands-on tasks where we would sit there and say, I need a fork. And then they would learn how to respond. 1 minute, I will get you a fork. And this was very effective. I moved this into registration and everything else. So role playing and hands-on, it's a godsend. And what I found is they actually remembered things much faster than had they been reading it off of a list of vocabulary words. So doing these kinesthetics, it promotes engagement. It gets you involved. You know, I did a talk recently on giving instructions, and I used the hokey pokey. I don't know if you know it. It's a song, put your right hand in, put your right hand out. And everybody was doing these motions because you get involved, you pay attention. So all of these tend to be much more memorable and more meaningful because they're working with real situations. Now, technology integration, I'm not going to touch on AI. I want to talk about using the course book, using the digital platforms you have available, and working with these. Take advantage of technology. We always think, oh, technology has to be a computer. A blackboard in its day was learning technology. Interactive whiteboard, learning technology. So it does not have to be AI to learn. So taking advantage of the platforms that you get with course books, I'll tell you, I have to produce my own materials. It's a lot of work. When you go to publishers like ELi, they've done all the work for you. They have large teams that are able to do all this. So take advantage of what's right in front of you. For technology, we talked about interactive whiteboards and the educational apps. Use various different sources and make your classes dynamic and immersive. And the way you do this is changing around and mixing up the tasks or doing multiple things at the same time. Reading and speaking at the same time. There's a lot of argument over reading aloud. I think it should be done. I think it's important. It shows where the gaps are in their pronunciation, in their ability to figure out how to form words. So mixing reading and speaking, now I'm mixing two modalities. The other people in the classroom are listening. So this is the idea of integrating and using practical applications. You know, you see here another example. This is going back to January 6th, something we're still talking about. And you can see that mixed in this page, in these two pages, we're looking at different things. We're doing a presentation of a conversation. Then we're going back and we're reading it and using it again. We're answering questions. We're mixing in appropriate grammar. We're working on critical thinking. And not only doing just a gap fill, but we're doing multiple different ways of thinking, completing the sentences, choosing, multiple choice. All these are practical applications, and then going to the platform and learning. Again, they should be meaningful tasks, things that are important to them. And depending on how diverse your classes are and what you're teaching teenagers may be totally different from the way and the methods that you teach adults. When I was teaching in Brazil, I taught a lot of teenage classes. Things tend to be more fun, more active, meaningful to them, talking about their lives, their free times, how much they hated their parents. When I went to the adults didn't want to play games as much. They were more, quote, professional. I had to draw them out and get them to play. So we need to cater not only to the content, but to the context and what it means to the learner, and figure out, is it important to the learner to reach a good objective? There are a lot of case studies. I really recommend any teacher should be constantly improving. You're doing it here. You're here. Congratulations. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir. But continuous learning. I've been teaching for over 20 years. I learn things all the time. The English language keeps changing. I'm still learning English, let alone other languages. It's important that we read case studies and get ideas from other people on how they mixed different modalities. Going to conferences, coming to webinars like this, it's important because you're going to learn from others and from their experience. This will be included in the PDF. These are 3 good case studies that I highly recommend you read. So you don't need to copy them down. They'll be in the PDF. Now, some of the challenges. Oftentimes, when people are here talking, they don't realize who they're talking to. I can't see you. I don't know where you are. I don't know your reality. One of the biggest challenges, and my friend, the past president of IATEFL, Harry Kucha, made the statement to me once that in some cities, in some towns, in villages in Africa, they don't have internet, they don't have computers, they don't have electricity, they don't have books, they don't have desks, they have walls if they're lucky. Writing is done with sticks in the dirt. This is how students practice. And that really woke me up because I'm used to working, I've got an interactive whiteboard. I've got a great computer set up here to teach online. So we need to adapt what we can if we're teaching in an area with limited resources. There's also accessibility. Can people access the materials? Can they access the technology, the digital offerings from platforms? Now, if you're dealing with mixed classes, different cultures, we have to be sensitive to the different cultures. We have to worry about who are my students, where are they from, what can I get away with? For instance, I joke a lot. I have to be careful depending on where I'm teaching. For instance, when I'm doing a talk in, let's say, Muslim countries, I have to be culturally sensitive of what I talk about. And the most important thing is building an inclusive environment. And this is one thing, because you've got, let's say in a typical classroom, I don't know the size, but in my old classrooms, 20 to 30 students. What that meant, 20 or 30 individuals who had different goals, different objectives, different learning preferences, different ways of remembering. And sometimes you need to cater to all of them. Now, people who want visual may get bored with auditory and vice versa. But you have to build this community within your class to build an environment where everybody is accepting of each other's learning preferences, allowing you to take advantage of working with multimodality. So to just start to wrap up a little bit, working with multimodality gets people engaged. You're using diversity. You're using lots of different ways to get your point across for them to consolidate to their memory. Multimodality gives a deeper understanding, and it's usually much more dynamic, and I think more enriching when they remember. So you notice, look at your typical course book, and when you look at it, you've got all these modalities built in already in your course book. We don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. We have the greatest tools in front of us. But don't be afraid to bring in your own ideas. You know, the idea I had of bringing in paper plates and cups, doing role modeling and role playing, that was my idea, and it proved to be successful. So be creative, try new things. Doesn't always work. Music. This is a great one. I was very happy because I love this song by The Cure. Working with songs, working with music. Now, you don't have to be a singer. I happen to be a musician, but I can't sing. There's lots of ways to use music. Listening to the music, discussing the music, looking for things. I actually use, when I'm teaching business frameworks, I use the song, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Because it's perfect for filling out a SWOT framework, and it's working with conditionals. What better way and what more fun working with music? Using videos. Use a video, turn off the sound, just so the visual, and then talk about what they saw. Use some critical thinking. What do you think was going on that we didn't hear? Go back and listen. Vice versa. Play some audio without the video. What did you hear? What do you think? Get them mixing all this together. And this is what multimodality is about. Of course, life skills. Make it effective communication. Don't expect adults to have conversations fit for a teenager and vice versa. As I said before, make the content and the context fit the situation. Again, in the PDF, you'll get some references for the talk, some great ones here. And I want to thank and reference two of the books that I took screenshots from, Ready for Planet English and English Goals, available from ELi. And with that, that's me. So I'd like to hear from you, some questions, comments.
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Okay, so
I'm going to stop sharing so we can see us, or at least see me. There you are.
Yes.
Hi.
So hi again. So let's wait for a few seconds so that we receive some questions. As I said before, take advantage of this moment to ask Rob anything. Well, almost anything. Well.
Oh, you can ask anything. I don't necessarily answer, but you know.
Okay, I've got one first question coming in. Mm-hmm. So from teacher Tatiana. So she's saying, I have a feeling that our students are becoming very dependent on the visionary, so images, pictures, so the visual features, and substitute words with images. What do you think it could be the process?
Actually, you're correct, but it's not beginning. They've been doing it forever. We just didn't realize how important images were. Now, if you think back, you know, I'm 100 years old. So when I was learning in school, you know, we didn't have TV. We didn't have whiteboard. We weren't able to see all these images and work with. We used to, in the old days, we'd be cutting pictures out of magazines and making collages. And that was the only visuals that we would see unless we had a good teacher who was able to draw and could draw a meaningful picture. So I think it's not that we're becoming more visual. I think we always were. We're just seeing it more because we have access to more visual. And I do a talk on this with presentation, that we do presentation the wrong way, I feel, because we put a bunch of words in a little picture. What I do is I put a big picture and a couple of words, because it's the visual that we tend to consolidate immediately. Immediately. I hope that helped.
Thank you. Yes, it was very clear. So I've got other questions. Okay. How does multimodality enhance learning outcomes in diverse educational settings?
Well, by mixing everything up, we find that you get to hit everyone in the classroom. You give them multiple ways of importing this information. Because remember, if I'm just seeing it, it goes into one part of my visual memory. I don't feel it. By working with this diverse mixture, it consolidates in the whole brain. And that's what we're looking for. We want quick recall of it. You know, some of you may be like me. I remember faces very well, but I forget names to go with those faces. So it's all about memory. Isn't that right, Nancy? Oh, no, you're Sylvia. But yeah, it's, you know, I'm good at some things. I'm bad at others. But knowing what it is, when a teacher's working with me, and being diverse, I'm able to figure out what I need to learn and how I need to learn. You know, I never learning Japanese, learning Italian, learning French for me were easy because I could relate them to English. You know, I see the sound, makes sense. Polish, you know, I've been here a while, I'm still trying to learn PRZY is pronounced yeah. It blows my mind because I'm so used to thinking in English and relating to English. So I need the visual, I need the auditory, and I need the kinesthetic because I need to write it down and see myself writing it in order to consolidate it.
Thank you. And then, you know, the multimodal approach is, well, is appealing for the multiple intelligences, for the different learning styles, but I think it is also useful because nowadays students get bored so easily. So they need to be stimulated from different angles, from different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly. And one thing, there is new research. I was always one of these that said, like a lot of people say, mix everything up and mix it quickly and, you know, change from one to another to keep them engaged. Research is starting to show that might be a mistake because and this research came out of multitasking. We always said, oh, great, you're a good multitasker. But when you think about it, that means we're only putting 80% of our brain to the task we're doing because 20% is thinking of the other task. So are we really laser focused on what we're doing by multitasking? And it's the same with learning. If we keep jumping around the styles, I don't know. We're still waiting for definitive research on this. It's going to take a while. People don't research like they used to. Money.
Okay, thank you again. Moving on to another question. Okay, I've got two questions here. Let's start with one. So, teacher Antonella, so how can overcome the difficulties in a class when you use different media? So, but you don't have answers. For example, there's a fear of speaking, fear of face-to-face confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
How would it work? Like in this case, recording speeches as homework, or what would you suggest?
I started, a quick story. I have a video of her, but not here. I had a student, Julia, when I had a bunch of teens. She would sit there, you'd go ask her a question, she'd be hiding away. She would not speak. And she did okay on her writing and her tests and everything else. I knew she knew it. She couldn't speak. I tried everything to draw her out. And then I decided, because this was when cell phones, almost every student had a cell phone. I said, all right, we're going to make home movies. You go home, you make a thing, you talk about your day, you talk about your shelf, you talk about whatever. She came back and we showed her video. The darn girl had better pronunciation than me. She was brilliant, but she wouldn't talk in front of the class. Now, after everybody saw the video, they were like, you ain't getting away with that. We know you can talk, answer the question. And she came out of her shell. Since then, I still talk to Julia. She's in her mid-30s now. And Julia signed up. She started taking acting classes and became an actor for, you know, small groups. She's now a court judge in Brazil.
Wow.
And whenever I see her, she's actually recorded videos for me saying, it's all because of Rob, because he made me talk. And this is it. You have to find a way to draw them out. There's always a way. May take a while, but keep working on it. Try different things. Let her be at home and do videos. If that's what it takes, do it.
Yeah, that's the tough task of teaching, of course.
Yeah, it's, it's like trying to get me to do homework. It ain't gonna happen. I know my limitations. I'm a horrible student.
Okay, I've got the last question. Yeah, I think we got quite a few minutes. So teacher Tatiana is asking, I think it's a tricky question, but let's see. So how can you teach students to stop using cliché? So she means like standard or fixed phrases. So she says setting expressions are great for elementary level, for pupils, but advanced students should become more sophisticated in their speech. What can we suggest, like a different approach,
Well, it's funny, Dad, I've been doing this for a long time. I wrote an article about this like almost 20 years ago because I heard students saying it's the bee's knees. And I said, who taught you that? Oh, our teacher, we learned that, and it's raining cats and dogs, and the bee in my bonnet. And I said, but nobody has said any of those after they were 5 years old or from the 1920s. I said, why are we teaching ridiculous things? And I know why, because they think they're cute. The first thing is, and as a publisher, please, I'll ask you, stop putting them in the books. And teachers, stop teaching things that they will never use. If you come up to me and say, it's the bee's knees, I'm going to ask you, are you a time traveler from the 1920s? That's to answer part of the question. What I like to do is when people are learning these cliche lines, like, I can't even think of one offhand, but when they learn these things, I immediately try and teach them, how can we paraphrase that? How can we change that? How can we make that more normal speech? Because, for instance, I may know it's a bee's knees. Sylvia, where were you born? What country? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. In the south of Italy?
In the south of Italy. Now, we don't know, I'm just making this up, but we don't know Sylvia's level of English. We don't know what book she learned from. We don't know a lot about her. And if I'm to say, oh, Sylvia, it's the bee's knees, might be the first time she's heard it. She has no idea what I'm talking about. And she doesn't want to seem silly, so she won't ask. Like most learners of English are. So there's a lack of communication. Now I know Sylvia knows it. But for example, I teach my students, just because you're learning this, you don't know what that Chinese guy learned. Stick to the basics. The idea is to communicate.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Well, I can just say, talking from a publisher, of course, point of view, that nowadays books try to include what we call the functional language, just because the request is to teach how to communicate in English properly in context, not just in a ideal situation, okay. So yeah.
And this is the thing, I talk about this because I do a lot with business English, and I work with executives mostly at C1, C2 level now. I'm fixing the problems that we actually caused when we were teaching them lower level general English. So we kind of fail, and it's nice that you're including functional English, and this is why it's a good series, because this is what they need later. They don't need it's raining cats and dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
I know piovo tutto di giorno.
Yeah, that's correct in Italian. Yeah, it is.
I don't know why I remembered that, but so
Okay.
yeah, great.
Well, I think that's all. I think we've reached the end of this session.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Rob, of course, for your time, and also special thanks from our teachers. So most of them actually appreciated your sense of humor and your explanation, the way you actually tell stories when presenting. So I think it is very interesting, very nice. I would also like to thank all the teachers attending this session. And I would like just to remind that we will have another session scheduled on the 13th of March. So if you'd like to join us, you are all welcome, and more info on our website, and I put the link in the chat box. Remember to download the PDF, so the handouts kindly put together by Rob. And okay, that's it then. Thank you so much, Rob, and all the teachers.
Thank you, and thanks everybody. Ciao.
Arrivederci. Bye.